welcome to Two Boomer Women. I'm your host, Agnes Knowles. I've been talking with Boomer women for almost a decade now. Well, I guess I've been talking to Boomer women all my adult life. Reinventing myself several times along the way, though, but always focused on us, Boomer women. With this incarnation of Two Boomer Women, I'll be interviewing other women who have a message of interest for our demographic. If you want to hear about or learn about something specific, let me know and I'll find someone who understands us to talk about it. There's a contact page at twoboomerwomen.com. If you want to be a guest on Two Boomer Women, bring it on. There's an application form at the website too. Finally, this show is all about conversation. We women know its value. We know how to do it, and we must perpetuate the art form. So let's get started with today's show. Welcome to the Two Boomer Women podcast. I'm your host, Agnes Knowles. I have this line I use sometimes that I was born before hormones were invented. Generally speaking, I had a pretty easy time of my reproductive years, and menopause wandered into my life with very little fanfare. Now, I will admit those are my words, and perhaps my former husband tells a different story. But I know there are many, many women who've had a bear of a time making the transition to menopause. I spend time with a number of older women, and several of them tell the story of still having issues into their 70s and beyond. My guest today actually suffered burnout during her own perimenopause. We'll hear the story shortly, but my notes say she was a neuroscientist who, because of her own experience, transitioned from that career to being a menopause-specific health coach and a certified mindfulness practitioner. Over the last 8 years, she's worked with menopausal women, helping them with strategies that include mindfulness, meditation, mindful eating, exercise, rest, and self-compassion. She's the host of the Thriving Through Menopause podcast and a keynote speaker and best-selling author of The Mindful Menopause. Clarissa Kristjansson, welcome to the Two Boomer Women podcast.
Oh, Agnes, I am delighted to be here. Thank you so much.
Clarissa, do you mind explaining my intro about your own experiences and the transition from neuroscientist to menopause-specific health coach?
I know. I mean, I went through menopause being a neuroscientist. I was working corporate roles, you know the score, long hours, not much slack. I was a single mom and I lived in Australia. Then I don't live in Australia now. I live in Sweden. But there I was, really very far away from my family and managing all this on my own. And I would say that I've been an anxiety sister or sufferer, whichever word you like to call, for many, many years. But that really came to the fore in perimenopause, and that set my world into a whole different sphere. I didn't sleep. I had extremely high blood pressure. And, to the point I was 179 over 90 something, which is, your eyes are saying everything here. I guess, that's pretty close to having a heart attack or a stroke. And I didn't feel it until the doctor, and then I had to be medicated. But, this constant pressure just eventually broke me. And I had a panic attack in the office in front of a very senior man. I mean, I was quite a senior manager and he was a senior manager. And I realized then that my life couldn't continue in this vein. And that was my turning point. Maybe tipping point is a better word to use. And I went on to initially train as a mindfulness practitioner. And I worked for a number of years with women in mindfulness, having left corporate, and kept thinking, these women are the same age. All these women are sort of somewhere between 43 and 51. They're all being ignored by their doctors. They're all being told, you're just stressed. Sign yourself off from work a bit. You'll be fine. And they weren't getting any further. And then I started to put, the pieces together and thought, they're all in perimenopause. Oh, and that was me too, because no one ever used that word with me. No one ever talked about it to me. No clinician ever mentioned that. But then when I put it together, I thought, right, this is an area I'm going to focus on. I'm going to learn lots about this so I can help other women.
I'm coming into this, as I mentioned, with very little experience with the issues around perimenopause. So I'm going to ask, and I may be way out in left field here, but did your neuroscience knowledge help you deal with what you went through with perimenopause? And I realize we're talking nervous system versus, I think, is it the endocrine system?
Yes.
But
I could join the dots when I learned about it, because then, of course, what I realized was that, menopause begins in your brain. You may have ovarian, you may have things going on and changing in your cycle, but really what you feel first is brain related things. And it's not surprising. You've got hundreds of estrogen receptors in your brain, and progesterone impacts your brain. And when they're fluctuating and changing, well, guess what? You feel it. You feel moody, you feel tired, you can't sleep, you can't rationalize, you've got brain fog. That's way before you've ever had a hot flash or even put on weight. So a lot of what is going on is in your brain. And of course, that connection between the brain and the rest of the body. So my neuroscience or my knowledge of the brain made me have real aha moments, but also gives you insight that you can do things to help your brain, which would help the rest of you.
Okay. So we have perimenopause, we have menopause when it's finally there. Is there sort of a continuum? Can you explain, or maybe you just have, but is there a continuum of that whole process?
Yeah. So before your hormones start to fluctuate, so really anywhere before 35, I hate to tell people that one. You're like, oh, thanks so much. Very motivating. But generally in your 40s and 50s, you go into early 50s, you go into perimenopause. And that is really when you're feeling most of these symptoms, if you experience them. So you're having hormonal fluctuations and decline. And you're also having more and more periods that are what called anovulatory. So in other words, you're not releasing an egg that could be fertilized in your monthly cycle anymore. And that in itself is creating a lot of havoc with our hormones when we're anovulatory. We are normally that about once or twice a year. But when we get into this stage, we become more and more and more anovulatory. And eventually, there's no more eggs being released and you're in menopause. And we talk about menopause, but it's actually one day, 12 months after your last menstrual period, your menopause. After that, you're postmenopausal and you're basically in a different phase. Your hormones may still be going down. They may still be settling to a new level, but you're not having that wild ride.
Now, you've mentioned a couple of the not side effects, the results, I guess. And many women are aware of the tiredness, the hot flashes, poor sleep. What are some of the other things that women experience? Can you describe how serious those can be for some women?
Yeah, so actually the things that are most common, you're right, are hot flashes and weight gain. But the reality is that the things that have the biggest impact on women's lives are anxiety, depression, compounded by the lack of sleep, the inability to focus, this brain fogginess. And they can really be very serious. I mean, there are women who do take their life. It's the highest suicide time for women is around late 40s, early 50s. And there is a huge link between that and the decline in estrogen, because estrogen affects major regulatory and emotional centers in the brain. Now, we can't say it's a one-on-one because obviously there are lots of other mitigating factors. A history of anxiety and depression will without doubt have an impact there as well. So if you've ever had any mental health illness, you need to take extra special care. And there are special forms of hormone therapy for those women that psychiatrists give out.
I think what I'm thinking is, that sounded strange. What I'm thinking is as you say that is, I really hope a lot of women my age and beyond, or even younger than me perhaps, that have gone through this are like now forgiving themselves.
Oh,
because
yes.
It's not that they just turned into the bitch from hell. They probably didn't have much choice.
No, progesterone decline is one of the things that takes away our protective effect against the stress hormone cortisol. So we don't buffer that hormone in the same way. So we are much more sensitive to stress. our whole journey is affecting our amygdala, our hippocampus in our brain, our prefrontal brain areas that are about emotion and mood and memory and regulatory factors that are all there. I mean, this is what's going on inside your brain. And then, of course, estrogen is a precursor for the production of serotonin, which is your happy hormone. It's made in your gut. And when you have less estrogen, it's not surprising you might feel low as well, low because you're not able to produce the same quantities of serotonin.
I think I'm going to up my gratitude game for the easiness with which I went through that stage of life. My goodness. Perhaps the next question becomes hormone replacement therapy.
Yes. So I'm always saying my caveat is I'm not a clinician, but hormone replacement therapy can literally save women's lives. I mean, we are at that level. And it is such a great thing for women in terms of being able to regulate a lot of their hormones. So it doesn't replace hormones. And now we call it hormone therapy because you're not replacing. What you're really doing is creating hormonal balance for women so that, you are able to feel a bit better. A lot of your symptoms will be more manageable, but it's only part of the story is what I would say, that without diet and exercise and stress management, its effect is good, but it's not as good as it could be.
Would it be something that a woman would automatically look into when she recognizes some of the early stages, or only if she's like whacking her kid upside the head every day and a half?
I think it depends on your clinician. And I think that, we've got to recognize that 40% of medical schools spend about 10 minutes teaching menopause. So a lot of clinicians are coming out into general practice and even obstetrician specialists with limited knowledge of menopause. Far too many women are given antidepressants as the be-all and end-all when they come, or they're ignored. And a lot of clinicians are still quoting the 2002 HRT study, which showed a link between hormone replacement therapy, as it was known then, and cancer. We now know that a lot of that wasn't quite correct, and the results were released early, but that report created headlines. It sticks in clinicians' heads and it sticks in women's heads. Yet we know that the picture's not quite that black or white. And of course, it depends on the person. So it's very important that if you aren't feeling well, you find a menopause savvy healthcare provider and you sit down with them and you talk, because there are different forms of hormones. There are different dosages. There are different combinations, and it is a little bit of going on an exercise to find out what works for you. It's not like here it is, off you go kind of thing.
That's valuable information, because that was probably some of the study information that was coming out as my friends and I were going through the perimenopause, like the really noticeable stuff. And I think most of us opted not to go with any hormone therapy. I was going to say replacement, hormone therapy. But now if we're advising our daughters, obviously the science is more refined, shall we say.
Yes, and I think we're learning all the time. And I think there's still lots of debate in the medical community. There are some clinicians who are saying you can take it for life, but there are lots of other clinicians that I've spoken to who are saying, not too sure about that one. We don't know the long-term effects, but we do know that you can take hormone replacement therapy for more than the recommended 5 years that used to be there. And you can certainly, within a number of years of actually being in menopause, so you've finished kind of your symptoms, still be put on hormone therapy if it would help you. So it is a little bit, but if you're really postmenopausal and it's been a while, you're going to be an uphill battle. And I think women are still also having issues with being prescribed testosterone, that very few clinicians are still willing to do that.
So once again, this is coming from my own naivety, but are there different formulae? So in terms of which hormone and how much?
Yeah, so women are often given estrogen. So it depends. If you've had a full hysterectomy and you don't have your ovaries left, then you will be given estrogen only. If you have your ovaries, but your womb has been removed, or you're still intact, you may be given estrogen, and you in a gel or a tablet, increasingly now in gel or patch format. And you will be possibly recommended to have a Mirena coil, which is a coil that's fitted that releases progesterone. Some women are also given testosterone as a patch or gel, particularly if they have real muscle issues or if they are very lacking in their libido. They're very low in energy as well.
Wow, it's always interesting getting into some of these subjects, and you realize that it's really complicated. And as you've just said, find a menopause savvy clinician to help you through that.
Yes, and someone who really can talk you through, Agnes. I mean, this is not, and I would say to your listeners, do not go to a compounding pharmacist and think that that is an option, because if you get hormone therapy from your clinician, it has passed regulatory guidelines. You will have the same quality of product over and over again. But in the US and in Canada, you can go to a compounding pharmacist or health functional medicine practitioner, and they're brilliant at what they do, but you may not be guaranteed the same quality of product over and over again because it's being made each time. And they make it from yams, but they don't have the quality control. So it isn't the best route to go down.
I'm sorry, that was just a curious yams. Okay.
Yeah, yam is where they extract the estrogen from. It's funny, that's the product they use to make the hormone therapy. It comes from yams. So everybody is having natural now in many ways. There's not many people having the old, really synthetic forms. But it's the quality and consistency of that that's important for people to know.
Wow. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for all this extra information.
Yeah.
Now, your bio, as I opened, talked about mindfulness, meditation, mindful eating, exercise, rest, and self-compassion. I know you wrote a book about mindful menopause, and this is only one podcast episode, but could you give us some tips on some of the most helpful strategies women might implement to handle life until your book arrives at their doorstep?
Of course. I think one of my key things to say is that what I call rock habits are pretty important. They are eating this mindful, intuitive way of getting your food. Plant-based diet, of course, which is what you need. And also plants are rich in natural estrogens. So you want to be eating those. They have phytoestrogens in them. So Mediterranean diet, which still tops all the US diets, or a similar style. I mean, not everybody's culturally attuned to eating a Mediterranean diet, but something along that vein. Plenty of fruit, vegetables, fish, white meats, grains, those kinds of things. And cutting back or down on the refined processed foods, the sugars, the alcohol, they're not our friend. And when we do that, we actually help to metabolize the estrogen in our body much better, because we're actually cultivating that part of our microbiome. So that's really important. But diets don't work. We all know that. So eating intuitively is a much better way. Eating mindfully, slowly, chewing our food, enjoying it, savoring it is a pretty good idea. So that for me is always there. And exercise. Exercise is really important. And movement. We need to be doing that because it helps our sleep. It helps our mood. And also it's important for women because their bone health is always at risk after our estrogen levels drop. We are more at risk at osteoporosis. So moving and particularly strength training is really important. So I go on and on about women to lift weights and do resistance and do yoga, because actually that's the part. And of course it's important for our hearts and keeping us well generally as we age. And then manage your stress, which is where the mindfulness really comes in, is stress isn't our friend at all. It never has been, and we are, as I said, more sensitive to stress, and we can feel very anxious. And mindfulness is proven to help us manage our stress. It's really proven to help us cope with anxiety and mild depression. And so having a simple mindfulness daily practice, maybe you only have 5 or 10 minutes, but you make that time for yourself to sit quietly. You can do a breathing exercise. You could go for a mindful walk. You might draw mindfully. I mean, you don't have to meditate if you don't like meditation, or it's hard. And it is hard if you're very stressed and you're used to multitasking and being on the go. Say to somebody, oh, just sit here and meditate for 10 minutes. Is, round and round in your head is going, I wonder what I will have for dinner. What should I be shopping? Did I let the cat out? And then suddenly something weird pops in your head because you're not used to it. So I think you can start small and build up there.
And I will vouch for that insofar as like I love mindfulness. I'm really big on mindfulness. And I find that it can start out as simple as, I've got a green light. Thank you. And just doing that. And then, the next thing is like you're walking and you're enjoying the flowers or the ice crystals that we currently have out here.
Yeah.
But just, it becomes a habit.
Yes.
The whole mindfulness leading into gratitude and that sort of thing. So
absolutely. I think being grateful, and I think cutting ourselves some slack in self-compassion. Nobody is as harsh on ourselves as our own inner voice. Yeah, and practicing self-compassion is really important at this time because we are going through a lot of changes. There are times when we really aren't very nice to the people we love. We can be very critical of ourselves. We live in a society that is very critical of older women, the way we look, the way we dress, what shape we are. And there's still a lot of shame and stigma associated with menopause, a difficulty to communicate with others at work and maybe even within our own family. So we do need to practice self-compassion, and knowing that we're okay is really important, and gentle, kind words to ourselves, and knowing that everything is okay. Even if we've had a bad day, we can also say, well, I can forgive myself for that.
Yeah. I just had an aha moment insofar as many women that I speak to that are my age, they sort of say like, how did this happen? The last I remember was being, 35 or 37. And there are a lot of changes that go on between 35 and 65. And, to suddenly become aware of the 65-year-old is sometimes, and you can be really harsh with yourself. Whereas to understand that you have possibly raised children, you've possibly had a career, you've dealt with the stresses, you've, done all sorts of things that have created the current you. And so self-compassion, that's really so important.
I think it's actually one of the things that really helps people to come to terms with aging, because we have to we change so much. But I think the good thing is to realize that it is temporary. I mean, menopause is temporary. It does pass. And we come out the other side, and I've been interviewed at somebody on my podcast who's a leading women's clinical psychiatrist, and she said, our brains get better.
I've been reading more and more articles about that recently, and it's like, yes.
Yes, we're actually more creative. We're more willing to care for ourselves, and sometimes put ourselves first in ways that we haven't done earlier in our lives. So I'm really enamored with the fact that there's all this opportunity. I'm in my 60s now, so I mean, I'm there, living my purpose. But it's quite hard when you're sort of late 40s and you're in the midst of juggling so much. And that's when we have to be compassion. And I think compassion teaches us also to have boundaries. To say that word no. No's a very small word, and quite hard, but it's an important word in caring for ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a guest some time ago that talked about that magic 2-letter word. Yeah. It's interesting reading, and one, like, just all the transitions that come about as we get into our 60s, and those of us that are getting closer to 70, realizing that, yeah, that whole creativity thing is definitely there, and realizing just that, opening your eyes to the fact that you have, probably by necessity, been somebody else for the last 25 years. You've been a mother, you've been a wife, you've been an employee, you've been a daughter, perhaps caregiving, but now you're coming into the stage of life that is about you, and embrace it.
Exactly. I love that. And I love that sense that you can do that. And, that as a neuroscientist, I can tell you that when we don't have as much estrogen in our brains in the same way, we kind of cut a slack. Mother Nature didn't expect us to be caring and producing babies at 60. So with some of that maternal caring has kind of vanished a bit, and we can speak our minds and speak our truth and stand in it and be our authentic selves, which I think is wonderful.
Yeah, I get a chuckle looking back at some of the writings of decades ago, where those women were considered like rebels, and like, just, you didn't want to go near them, and you don't associate with them because they're speaking their mind. And of course, nowadays we're going, yes, you do that. You go, girl.
I had a few relatives like that, I can tell you. I can remember that my own grandmother and another lady who was in my father's side of the family, and they both lived to be over 100. They were pretty feisty, both of them.
Yeah. Gotta love those genetics.
Yeah.
My next question may or may not be somewhere you want to go, because I'm introducing an area you might not be fully versed on. But in your Podmatch profile, you posed a question whether brain fog might be a sign of something more serious. Now, we're living in the time of COVID, where brain fog is also a side effect of that beast. Is there any way to know whether one brain fog interacts with the other, or is there a risk that women might be ignored because, you've probably had COVID and don't know it?
I think that brain fog is something that we should pay attention to. Usually, most women who have brain fog in perimenopause, it will go. It will pretty much, our hormones settle down and your brain pops back. I think if you've had COVID, there's certainly more risk now. There are some studies coming out that are saying that COVID and menopause there can be strong relationships between the two, and that women who take hormone therapy apparently are recovering better from COVID than women who aren't. So I think this is very early days, but I think to watch your brain. A small percentage of women need to take care if they have brain fog in perimenopause, but that's a genetic link. So if your mother or in your family had Alzheimer's or dementia, and you get bad brain fog, you need to be more wary of it.
That's a slippery slope, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a slippery slope. But for most women, you should just recover. And then if you're still brain foggy, then it could be COVID. But otherwise, then you need to have some check it out. But the best thing you can do to protect is diet and sleep. Sleep is incredibly important for long-term brain health.
Okay. I work with older women, and I know some of them, they talk about brain fog, and then they say, well, I've got to do puzzles, and I've got to do this, and I've got to do that. Because as we get older, if you forget something when you're 25, you don't think about it. You forget something when you're 65, and you worry about dementia.
Yes.
And is there any tips in that regard?
So what I know from reading and following, and I follow the work of the Women's Alzheimer's Movement a lot. They're a very good site. You can read their stuff, brilliant stuff. They have a very strong emphasis on diet, first and foremost, And definitely omega-3 fatty acids are a big part of that. They have a strong emphasis on sleep and stress management. And then the other side is community and connection. So a lot of the things one would have seen in those blue zone studies where women, we saw that the people who lived well and were healthy had a plant-based diet, as we said, they were active, they were socially connected, and they kind of managed their stress. They didn't live in very stressful environments, we have to say, places like Okinawa and some Greek island, but those things were really, really there. So a lot of those basic habits that we should be building and taking with us will have protective effects for our brains.
I like the way you talk about just that whole socialization thing, because after two years of COVID, I guess about 4 months ago, I started working with an elderly woman who had mild cognitive impairment was the diagnosis. And she's smart as a whip. She can hold a great conversation. But since I'm visiting her twice a week, she's just going like, oh my goodness, like I feel so much better and this and that. And it's because like she doesn't go to bridge anymore. She doesn't socialize anymore. So the fact that I go twice a week and we have these great conversations and we go for walks and we do all sorts of things, she's feeling so much better. And I'm thinking, okay, like really, I hope her husband reevaluates or keeps an eye on this whole progression of dementia kind of thing. So
yeah, there's no doubt that isolation isn't good. It isn't good for us at any time, but it's certainly not good for our brains.
Great information. Thank you. Our listeners are primarily boomer women. I've admitted right from the get-go that I'm coming in a little blind here. Is there anything I haven't asked you that you think women our age should think about or know or practice that we haven't talked about?
No, I think in many ways, Agnes, we've covered that. We've talked about things like nutrition, the need to keep exercising, which is actually becoming so much more important. Managing our stress, getting our sleep. We think that's hard. That really isn't easy for women to get those 7 hours in, but trying to get those in. And I've been reading quite a lot about not worrying if you don't sleep 7 hours straight in a row. But in fact, if you were to sleep, went to sleep, slept 4 or 5 hours and you awake a bit and then you slept a bit more, that would actually be okay. And I think that's cutting some of us who are in our 60s and beyond a bit of slack, because there's a lot of evidence from kind of evolution that that's how we used to sleep. And then somewhere along the way, because we had an 8-hour work day and all the rest, we got into some sort of thing that you had to sleep these number of hours straight. But if we don't, it's okay. And take a nap if you feel tired. It's a super thing to do.
I love naps. This is just a random thought, is that I have perfected the art of power naps as well. So I don't know if that was just an accident or whether that can be done, but just to lie down for like literally 22 minutes.
Definitely. Go for it. I love it.
Now, we've talked about hormones and things like that. And just recently, I listened to a lot of talk radio. Recently, I heard a thing. This woman said, oh, I found I always wake up at like 1:30 in the morning. So I've been taking melatonin. And the doctor was saying, melatonin is a hormone, not anything like, it's not like a sleeping pill or something like that. And so to be really careful, I think it's fairly normal, isn't it, to sort of rouse in the dead of night and sort of readjust and go, okay, like what time is it? Okay, go back to sleep.
Perfectly normal. Yeah. We wake up lots and lots of times. I mean, we don't sort of go to sleep and sleep deeply. We have periods when we have deep sleep. Often those are the first 4 hours. Then we might wake up and be sort of a little bit more awake. We might even wake up, and we can wake up lots and lots of time in the night, but not be aware of it. And we don't necessarily need to be taking melatonin. I mean, for some people it works, and some people it has absolutely no impact at all. And I think if you're always waking up, then one of the things you can do is look and think, why am I waking up? Because if we are too cold or too hot, if we have had a lot of carbohydrates that release a lot of sugars, we might actually have gone into a bit of a blood sugar crash. And that will obviously, if your blood sugar crashes in the night, if you've had a great big pasta and lots of chocolate dessert before you went to bed and some alcohol, you're dehydrated and then your blood sugar crashes. And of course, the body will go into fight and flight without doubt, because it's going, oh gosh, I better mobilize, energy, the brain needs this. And so it'll set cortisol and adrenaline running. And of course, that naturally powers up the body and you wake up for a bit. And then you'll go back to sleep. So there are things that may be causing that are very simple to adjust.
So appreciating this talk. Tell us about your podcast.
Yeah, my podcast is called Thriving Through Menopause. So it is a podcast where we talk about this time of life. And sometimes I have doctors, but a lot of the time I have people who work in the broader sense with women in this midlife phase. I mean, obviously there are women who are perimenopausal, menopausal, younger for a variety of reasons, but we tend to focus on the things that you can do. Yeah. So what could you do about your sleep? What could yoga bring to you? How could you eat differently? We've had somebody who talked about caring for your skin or styling your clothes differently. So I have a very broad range of guests who come on, and we have a lovely chat like we've been having here, Agnes, and really hope that women are empowered. We have an episode every Tuesday. And
you're on all the usual Apple and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, you can find me everywhere. I'm on everywhere and on YouTube too.
Oh, okay, great. So once again, just in case somebody goes, oh, what was that called again? So Thriving Through Menopause is your podcast. You wrote a book that I think everybody should now buy. Tell us about that.
It's called The Mindful Menopause, and I wrote that in 2018. It's a mindfulness book, not a menopause book, really. I would say that it's about how mindfulness stepwise could support you from awareness through self-compassion to finding a new direction in life. And it's got lots of practices that you can take away and do. And my second book is coming out in March.
Very good. Now, is this in bookstores or primarily Amazon or?
Amazon. And we're on Amazon with The Mindful Menopause. That's the main place you can get that book. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Now, when I was browsing around your website, I saw a course, Thriving Through Menopause. We've missed your January program, but will you offer it again? Can you tell us about it?
Certainly will. I have a 12-week course for those of you who want to go deep and work with me and really look at your lifestyle and habits, your mindset. And that question is, who am I and who am I becoming? So we work through a range of different ways to help a woman in a sort of tailored way to do that. We sometimes work in a group if we have enough people, but I do work one-on-one. But if you're just thinking, oh, maybe I need a little bit of help, you can also do that. And I have a smaller course that you can jump on and do a little shorter program with me that's over 3 or 4 weeks, just to give yourself a bit of a guiding North Star.
You've also got some free resources, I saw.
I do. Yes, I've got something on brain fog, on mindfulness, on self-care. I've got a whole host of little things you can download for free there.
Okay. And that website is?
It's my name, ClarissaKristjansson.com.
And I will recommend to listeners that you look in the show notes, because Kristjansson does have a specific spelling, and the link will be in the show notes. Listeners, such good information. Issues, sometimes serious and long-lasting, and I never even thought, Clarissa, about the life-ending possible issues if somebody, like if suicide rates go up. They all come from menopause. Now that the age of, yes, go ahead.
No, yes, they do. So be aware of that. Be aware and don't be afraid to ask for help.
And as you mentioned, menopause savvy, menopause specific. Yeah. Mm-hmm. The age of menopause is now for many, it's only midlife. So finding a way to help yourself and thrive through the years is so important. So yeah, check out Clarissa's website. Get her freebies, if nothing else, and just wait for the next course. And it sounds like we should all be tuning into your podcast. So I'm going to go find that as soon as we're done here. If you have comments on today's show, you can leave them where you're listening or at twoboomerwomen.com/join-the-conversation. Feel free to leave stars. They help us grow. And hit the subscribe or follow button before you go, and then you'll be notified about future interviews with more of my great guests. If you would like to be a guest on podcast or know someone who would, there's an application form at the website too. Clarissa Kristjansson, thank you so much for being my guest today.
Thank you, Agnes. It's been a pleasure, and I hope your listeners gained value from this conversation.
If they're anything like me, they're going to be listening a couple of times, taking notes. That's great. Thanks so much. Have a great rest of the week.
You too. Thank you.